Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for attending our health stream this morning. We are going live with four amazing speakers. My name is Frank Abul Masumi. I'm a professor in electrical and computer engineering at UBC. And here I have four speakers. We have Dr. Deepak Kaura from One Qubit, Dr. Douglas Kingsford from Ministry of Health, Dr. Aline Talhouk from UBC, and Dr. Bill Tam from Digital Technology Supercluster. I would like to acknowledge a few people, including Professor Tim Salkudian and Dr. Peter Zanstra from BMI-AI, who initiated the effort at UBC, bringing together several of us in tissue biology, bioengineering, and medical imaging for multi-scale data integration, as well as Dr. Kevin Newton-Brown and Michelle Van de Pan from CAIDA, who are helping everybody across the UBC, various departments in AI initiatives. We're going to start with four 15-minute presentations. I'd like to mention that please post your questions in the chat box, and we are going to have a bit of time after all the talks are over to ask some questions from the panelists, and please fill out the exit survey that you will see at the end. So with this, I stop, and I would like to introduce Dr. Bill Tam. If maybe you could share your screen, that would be fantastic. Bill, as the past president and CEO of the BC Tech, he has been involved in many entrepreneurial activities as a founder, executive investor, advisor, and board member for the past 20 years. He's currently the chief operating officer of the Supercluster technologies, and he is going to talk to us about some of the work he's doing. Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate your time, and please start.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's a real pleasure and honor to be on this panel. It's great to see Aline and Deepak and Douglas on this as well. And I really appreciate, Frank, that you have bestowed upon me a real honor, an honorary degree just for the purpose of this meeting. I wish I was a doctor and esteemed as all my colleagues are, but I will do my best in this presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to present some information about the Digital Technology Supercluster, and in particular, the innovations that are happening in healthcare and many of the things that we've seen in terms of projects that have come through our supercluster efforts. Maybe by way of background, I can give a bit of an indication as to what the superclusters are. There are 5 of them in Canada, and it really is a signal of a new innovation paradigm for how we're approaching research and development between private and public sector, between academia and large and small companies. And we're quite excited to be representing the digital technology portion, which of course is headquartered out here in British Columbia, but all of the superclusters, including ourselves, have a pan-Canadian mandate. Now, one of the motivations for the superclusters was the potential that we have yet to fully realize. If you look at this chart, you can see that on many levels, Canada has the opportunity to perform much better than we are currently, especially around things like our innovation scorecard relative to other OECD countries, the proportion of companies that we have in the country that are small or very small that we would seek to grow, and ultimately how we can engineer this innovation around success in the economy, both GDP growth, productivity, and economic wellness for all Canadians. Now, one of the fundamental elements is when we look at the map of innovation relative to how it's being adopted, we can characterize that Canada's innovation supply chain is broken. It has been, and I think for many of the folks that have been in the health space, they recognize the opportunity to adopt technology, but perhaps we're not able to do it in quite the with quite the vigor that we would seek to otherwise. And the way that I would characterize this is, for most of Canadian industry on the left-hand side, technology buyers tend to be conservative, they're later adopters, and when they do adopt, oftentimes it's adopting from proven sources, which more often than not is from foreign suppliers. At the same time, we have a real significant base of innovators in Canada that tend to be smaller. There's a lot of startups that have come onto the scene over the last 10 years. Now, they may be lacking in full solutions, but they have some tremendous amount of capabilities and expertise in particular domains. And more often than not, their early customers are abroad, they're foreign. And finally, I think when we look at the research organizations and the inventors of much of what we can lay claim to in Canada, there is a linkage issue between the work that's being done there and the rest of sort of the private sector piece. And so the recognition of these gaps in the supply chain is one of the reasons why the supercluster phenomenon was created. So the ultimate objective here is to create a new model for innovation, one that harnesses the power of collaborative research and development. And as a result of that, bringing expertise from different domains together to achieve research and development outcomes that wouldn't have been possible without all the participants and the expertise that were brought into this. And that, we hope, will result in globally leading products and platforms that's really going to power digital transformation and Canada's place in the digital economy. Now, so I just want to take a quick quote from John Stackhouse, friend that's Senior Vice President at RBC, who often talks about collaboration is one of the most overused and underappreciated skills in business. Far too many people confuse it with cooperation. It is not. Collaboration
Bill, I guess we have a technical difficulty. Do you hear us? Apologies, everybody. We have a technical difficulty, I guess, which cable company Bill is with. We're going to try to resolve it within the next minute or so. Otherwise, I guess.
I'm praying. Aline, maybe if you're ready to go, would it be okay if we moved on and I'll get in touch with Bill and then we won't use up too much time?
Sure. Maybe we can start with
that. Sounds good.
Okay, Aline, do you want to share your screen? And apologies, everybody. I guess somebody can make a call to Shaw or tell us. But it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Aline Talhouk. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at UBC. And she's also the director of the Data Science and Informatics at OffCare, which is BC's Ovarian and Gynecological Cancer Research Program. Her research focus are in ethics of data sharing and privacy in the era of digital health and AI modeling, as well as developing and implementing predictive models to improve patient care in women's health and oncology. With great pleasure, Aline, please. You're on mute.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today among all the esteemed panel members giving talks this morning. Today, I'm really excited to share with you our vision of how we kind of foresee private federated machine learning to be the power engine for self-learning health systems. And in today's talk, I'm going to present to you an application and motivate this infrastructure in an application in ovarian cancer diagnostic research. However, all the tools and the algorithms and the infrastructure that we're providing is data agnostic and could be applied in different settings. So I will introduce privacy-preserving federated machine learning, the architecture, and how we think it can power a self-learning system. And then we'll introduce our Made in BC platform that implements this architecture named LEAP. So today we know that ovarian cancer is not a single disease, but rather 5 distinct diseases that differ in how they originate, how they respond to treatment, and their expected survival outcomes. So for many patients, ovarian cancer in the past have been treated using a one-size-fits-all treatment approach. But as management and therapeutics are becoming more tailored to each disease type, it is really of fundamental importance to have the correct classification of disease to ensure that each patient is getting the disease and the treatment that's in line with her cancer. So diagnosis is typically done by a pathologist based on tumor histomorphology. And, given that ovarian cancer, thankfully, is a very rare disease, so in BC, we see about 400 to 500 patients annually with this diagnosis, many pathologists don't get to see very many, especially of the more rare forms of the disease with 2 and 5% only prevalence. And so it becomes very difficult for them to classify them. And in fact, a study that looked at reproducibility of these diagnoses among general pathologists, and here reproducibility is measured with a measure of agreement, Cohen's kappa, where 0.5 is equivalent to a coin toss and 1 is perfect agreement. We see that general pathologists are closer to the coin toss end of the spectrum. Now, a pathologist with gynae specialty training, they do much better, 0.67 to 0.89, and supported by immunohistochemistry, that's the gold standard, is 0.9. Now, immunohistochemistry takes long to, well, not that long, but longer to evaluate, and it's a little bit more pricey. So one of my colleagues, Dr. Ali Bashashati, has thought, okay, can we use artificial intelligence to help classify or help diagnose these 5 types of cancer? And using data from 159 patients, he built the gold standard from the gynae pathologist supported by IHC. He trained a model that was able to achieve 0.81 reproducibility, which is fantastic because it's already better than what general pathologists can achieve alone. And so we thought, well, if coupled with using this AI classification tool, perhaps could assist general pathologists when a specialized pathologist is not around, because that achieves better accuracy. And it could use to better triage the cases that require immunohistochemistry or that require a review by pathologists. And here I have to say that the AI is a lot cheaper, of course, because all it requires is just a scanned image and then it runs. Now, most deep learning algorithms are known to be data hungry, and it is possible that with more cases, the artificial intelligence can be improved. The effectiveness and the reproducibility of the artificial intelligence can be potentially improved. So for machine learning to work effectively, it requires a lot of data. But typically to get this data, we have to go outside of our province. Since we only see about 400 cases per year, we need to reach out to other centers and other provinces and countries even. But centralizing all this data is problematic. So first of all, especially in the case of high resolution images, it's impractical. It requires a lot of, it's very slow, requires a lot of space, and this health data is often regulated, and it adds odds with privacy to share it freely. So there's a lot of regulations, and typically requires a lot of time to negotiate the data sharing agreements. So we thought, is there a way to learn useful predictive models without centralizing the data? And the answer is with federated learning. So with federated learning, let's say a researcher is interested in developing a model, and they want to use data from multiple centers. So they first start by sending a request through the cloud to each of the centers. Then a local model is developed at each individual site without ever sharing the data. And once the model is fit, the model parameters are then shared back to the cloud where they're aggregated, and a global model is developed and it's ready to be used for prediction. And this step can be repeated multiple times and continuously to continuously evaluate and improve the algorithm as more patients come in, and thus it becomes a self-learning algorithm and automatically improves with time. On the prediction side, when a pathologist is interested in assigning a diagnosis to a specimen, what they would do is they would scan the slide, let's say at VGH in Vancouver. Then they make a diagnosis, and then based on that, the system makes a diagnosis. So they would log into the cloud, they would put in their, the cloud would identify them, identify their privileges. They know that they can make predictions. And so they enter the patient's PHN that they would like to predict on. And then the cloud will return, or the system will return a prediction. Now, if the two diagnoses agree, nothing further to do. And if they don't agree, perhaps immunohistochemistry can be used, or a review could be done by a specialized pathologist. But it's very important that the final diagnosis is updated in order and used to retrain the system in future iterations so that the system can learn. Now, the advantages of federated learning compared to centralized learning are many. So first and foremost, it provides faster and more efficient access, because the data is never transferred or shared. We have the ability to quickly repeat this learning process and then develop models and update them in real time. It also provides each health center more control over their data, because they're actually never sharing it, and they could revoke access at any time. So all they have to do is just cut that link from the network. It is also more secure, because it's a lot more difficult to attack distributed systems than it would be centralized ones. And because the data is never shared, it provides some level of privacy, although privacy in this case is not fully guaranteed. So what would it take to ensure privacy? Well, for starters, good governance is key. And what governance is basically an agreement between the different members of the network and the different stakeholders on how the data is going to be obtained and how it's going to be shared. So for example, will patients provide consent? Who can access the data? What can they use it for? How often can they access it? And so on. Another approach that's gaining a great deal of popularity is using generative adversarial networks to create synthetic data, which is lookalike data to the real data, but that is actually derived from the distribution of the real data, but is not real, and training models on this synthetic data. And that's another approach, but it still does not guarantee privacy. The only way to provide some level of guarantee is to adopt something that we call a differential privacy framework. And in the words of Cynthia Dwork, who's one of the developers of this approach, differential privacy addresses specifically the paradox of learning nothing about an individual while learning something useful about a population. And that seems what we may want in this setting. Individual patient data is very private, but the knowledge that comes out of that data should not be private and should be used for the greater good. Now, how do we implement differential privacy? Generally, this is done by adding tactical noise to the result. So if it's a predictive model, we add tactical noise to the parameters. And with this noise, we create something called plausible deniability, which means we cannot ascertain whether a patient's specific record was used in developing the model or not. Now, as you could imagine, as you add more noise to the data, you get more privacy, but there's this trade-off between privacy and accuracy, and finding this delicate balance is of utmost importance, and this is an open research problem that we're still working on. So here at UBC, I've been working since 2017 with a colleague, Dr. Ivan Beschastnik, and we've been developing this, implementing this privacy-preserving federated analytics into this platform called LEAP. And the idea here is to implement privacy by design and by default, and to build an end-to-end system which integrates with existing solutions that are used for data capture in databases such as RedCap, a popular system for data capture and research. And making this system open source and easily deployable. And we are ready, we have a prototype and we're ready to have it tested. I'm not gonna go into too much detail about the architecture of LEAP, but I do invite you to visit poster session D05 with our students, Matt and Addie, presenting more detailed information. And as mentioned, we are ready to test the system, and we've been recently obtained funding by the Cascadia Data Alliance, who's supported by Microsoft Research, to establish an AI-based pathology diagnostic network. And we put together this multidisciplinary team of researchers to sort of see what it would take to implement this network in BC, Washington State, and Oregon, where we're able to make these diagnoses in the use case that I discussed earlier without ever explicitly sharing any patient data, but while providing adequate level of privacy and security. So on our team, we have Dr. Basha Shati from UBC Biomedical Engineering, Dr. Jean-François Rajat from UBC Data Science Institute, Dr. Tanya Rubello, who's a legal scholar and Dean of Health Sciences at SFU, Dr. David Huntsman, BC Cancer and UBC and Director of OVCare, Dr. Holly Harris, who's an epidemiologist from the Fred Hatch, and Dr. Terry Morgan, who is a researcher from OHSU in Oregon. And we're hoping that in the coming year, we'll have a proof of concept where we can test whether or not we can really implement this in practice and what it would take. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions either now or at the end. Thank you.
Fantastic, Aline. I would like to ask everybody to post their questions in the chat box, and I'll keep track of it and ask it from the panelists at the end. With that, we move on to Dr. Douglas Kingsford. If you could maybe share your screen. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Douglas Kingsford. He's a Provincial Chief Medical Information Officer at Ministry of Health in BC. He's a family physician, but interestingly, he also has a PhD in AI with interest in AI, machine learning, and interpretability and workflow coordination. He's a core member of the leadership team advancing the Provincial Digital Health Initiative. And he's also a vice chair of the Provincial Clinical Leadership Committee for Digital Health. Without further ado.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is to briefly give you an overview of the provincial digital health strategy approach and where things are at. And then I'm going to close with where I think the opportunities are in the short to medium term around application of AI across the health sector. So the motivation for the provincial digital strategy, which has now been underway for about 2 years, was firstly the realization that the system, as we have an aging population with increased burden of disease, is going to be unsustainable going forward unless we have automation of processes, democratization of data, and machine learning to help guide decisions and also interpretation of data. In parallel with that, there was the awareness with the rise of consumerism in the health space with direct-to-patient devices and apps. We really want to be able to embrace that in the health system. We really need to provide better tools to help with care at a distance, AI tools and virtual care tools, particularly aimed at rural populations, and a real desire to work with industry to incorporate the cutting-edge advances in AI into both care delivery and system planning. So from a clinical perspective, what happens is that you've got a bunch of players that are interacting with even simple cases, whether those are primary care physicians, allied health providers, radiology, laboratory, and so forth. And so the problem that we have from the clinical operational perspective is there are digital systems with multiple vendors in the market. We need to manage the distributed access to information and workflow across the care team. And we need to be able to observe what's going on so that we can start to have a learning health system. And we need to give the patients tools that allow them to be full members of the team and fully access their records and participate in decision making as well. So some of the applications of AI that I'm particularly interested in are in the areas of analytics to look at process execution across the sector and outcomes in terms of the overall patient journey, not necessarily what happened in a single point of care. I'll talk more about that later. So the overall digital strategy that we developed is depicted on this one slide here. And after about a year of engagement with lots of stakeholders from across the sector, we settled on a digital strategy that has a clinical vision, which is to optimize health and wellness for every British Columbian. 4 key goal areas arrived out of that work. First was to really focus on patient empowerment. Second was to support integrated care with interdisciplinary teams centered in primary care. Third was to improve the care team experience. So that's about increasing workflow efficiency and ease of use of tools. And the fourth was to improve decision support, both around individual care decisions, but also process optimization and system planning and resource allocation decisions. Within that work, 5 key strategic areas have been stood up with the program of work. One is a group of tools to empower patients. The second is tooling to improve care delivery in the community setting with primary care specialists and allied health. Third is to improve capabilities in the hospital setting. The fourth is to enhance analytics and AI capabilities across the sector. And the fifth are what we call our foundational clinical systems, which are things like end-to-end pharmaceutical management, laboratory test management, image management, and so forth. And all of this sits on what we call our digital health foundation, which is the idea of having consistent technical architecture, consistent identity and access management, and privacy and security standards across the entire sector, so that going forward, there's consistency about how tools are implemented and how they can exchange data with one another. One of the key transformations that we've done is to move away from the idea of procuring a single big platform and really encourage the development of a standards-based multi-vendor ecosystem. So rather than saying that we're going to try and, as government, implement a whole lot of stuff across the sector, we really want to allow the consumer tools market space to flourish and be able to plug in with the sector. Same with Internet of Things platforms, same with the various analytics platforms that the digital giants are coming out, as well as the open source components, and allow those systems to interface and interact with the existing health information systems and the health authorities and in community practices. And so really the focus becomes on ensuring that data and events can flow across system boundaries and that workflow and processes can execute in a distributed fashion across the ecosystem. So these are both old ideas, but new concepts in terms of deploying at scale. So once we've got that, then the problem that we run into is that we've got a bit of a roadblock. We're wanting to improve care delivery, both in terms of system efficiency and also individual outcomes. But the system is not observable and it's not controllable in its current forms. And there's also inadequate decision support across the board. So to help move towards creating that real-time learning system to answer these questions, one of the key things that the government's done is to pursue a structure called the Health Data Platform. So this creates a federated environment, which is ideally suited for federated learning, where the data stays in the source system and then can be aggregated on demand to create high-dimensional data sets to answer specific research or operational questions. So there's no data lake or warehouse, but there is the mechanism to bring data together and link it to create high-dimensional, semantically normalized data sets on demand, subject to quite rigorous data governance and privacy and security controls, with a trusted third party doing the linking and de-identification. So this has already been stood up in its first instance as a data mart for COVID. And so there's a mechanism for streamlining access to data through this environment, which builds on what we've done historically with PopData BC with access to data for research. There's a data discovery mechanism called Data Scout. There's a secure environment for doing analytics. There are various data resources that the ministry has to bring to bear, and there's input of patient-centric data as well. So some of this work is around the plumbing, some of it is around the data governance. And the idea here is that there are data elements that are pre-cleared for release by local data stewards, and then there are other data elements which can be applied for through the normal channels in a more familiar research kind of process. And so this is intended to grow and become the focal point of an aggregation of federated data sources at scale across the province. One example of that growth is work that we are doing in pilot this year, early next year. It's been happening, starting to happen this year, around quality improvement and evaluation of care delivery in the team-based care context. So here we've got a group of stakeholders that are working together with patients to deliver care. So there are family physicians, there are specialists in the community, there are patients using patient tools, there are health authority providers, and there's also public health data sets and ministry admin data sets. So we're bringing extracts of data into the PopData BC secure environment, semantically normalizing and linking and de-identifying in that environment, and then handing those data sets off for analytics. And so what this allows us to do is to test out the plumbing, but more importantly, working to make sure that we've established the legal structures that need to be in place to create the appropriate legal authorities to collect the information, and a governance structure that creates trust at all the levels that's required to make this work. So this will be a really potent mechanism to produce high dimensionality feature vectors that cover the entire patient's journey, not just what's happening at one point of care. So having said all that, can everybody mute who's not speaking right now? I'm just going to quickly go over where I think the AI opportunities are in the health sector. So firstly, the health sector is a large distributed system. So we need support to be able to operate that system as a complex, dynamic, adaptive, decentralized, self-organizing system, not as a collection of silos as it's currently operated. So a lot of operations research opportunities there. We need work on the interpretation of data at scale. So there's an increasing number of data streams becoming available. So we're working on the discoverability and access elements, but we need help with the interpretation at scale, combined with those suitable access controls. We need to start thinking about observability and controllability of the system overall. How do you optimize care pathways, care delivery mechanisms? What are the goal functions? We need to start talking about that. How do we balance that against clinical autonomy? And then there's a need for ubiquitous decision support for patients, but for providers and also for administrators, and the need to train those tools on local data. On the data environment point of view, we're going to be moving into an environment of ubiquitous sensors. So again, we're going to be data rich, but poor in capability for interpreting those data streams, and also the high dimensionality sensor fusion that's going to become possible as more and more of these tools are deployed out into the stream. In the EMR, there's a thing called the continuous patient profile. So this is if I'm in my practice, I've got my EMR medical record, it has problem lists, medication lists, some clinical summaries. So, but what happens is, what's in my EMR is my opinion. And so when you look across the sector, what's in different EMRs about the same patient is a bunch of subjective truths. There's no ground truth. Well, it's difficult to find a ground truth for a lot of the things that we deal with. And so when you look at a distributed situation, we're bringing together different perspectives on the patient that are coming from different providers with different levels of accuracy. It varies with their specialty. We don't have a mechanism currently to reconcile that to create a fused picture that's actually probabilistically likely to be closer to ground truth in any one of the opinions. And that brings with it the notion of subscribing to specific content streams if you're a provider. We're going to need a lot of help with data visualization and interpretation. And as we get into the electronic medical records, needs to be a lot of emphasis on improving usability and workflow efficiency. That's a major barrier to the utilization of these tools currently. So tooling that can use AI to improve the workflow efficiency and reduce cognitive load is going to be massively important. We're going to need to get into automated extraction of structure out of narrative content that's currently in the EMRs. There's going to need to be a lot of emphasis on NLP. And I would predict that we're going to start to move away from structured user interfaces that we currently see in those tools. Instead of having a filing cabinet of records, we're going to need to move towards something that's more of a relevant précis that's presented on demand based on the clinical question that I'm trying to answer. But again, the current systems are all filing cabinets with fairly simplistic indexing structures. We're starting to deploy digital forms at scale. That's going to become assisted workflows, but that needs to become process automation, so fertile ground there. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for AI augmentation across the board of a wide range of clinical processes. In terms of the patient tools, self-management is going to be the game changer going forward. So AI tools to help with self-management are going to be really important for really shifting the population health outcomes. We're going to need to have tools that can present a summarized digest of the data that's available for the patient as opposed to the provider, with tooling that can help the patient interpret that information and provide advice and actions where that doesn't require human intervention. There's going to be obviously increasing demand for virtual assistants and agents. I saw some interesting data from the US where this was being done on a call center for one of the healthcare organizations, and they had an AI interpreting the emotional state of the caller, and the AI was actually coaching the human on the call how to react to the patient and was improving the outcomes beyond the human's ability to react to emotional cues. That's the first time I'd seen an emotional support structure that was actually outperforming a human. That was pretty amazing. We're going to see the increase in algorithms acting on the patient's behalf, and with that enabled data ecosystem, those tools being able to pull data from everywhere across the sector that relates to the patient. This is new territory we've not seen before. So that is a quick summary of where things are at in the health sector in BC digitally, and where I think the short and medium term AI opportunities are. I think we've got questions at the end of the session, so I'll leave it till then.
Fantastic, Doug. Really appreciate it. Without further ado, we move on to Dr. Deepak Kaura, who is the Chief Medical Officer and Chair of the Board of JUL, which is a Canadian Medical Association subsidiary. Prior to that, Deepak was in Qatar with several groups, and also he was an associate professor at Cornell and University of Calgary, and he also holds an MBA. Deepak, please, thank you. Go ahead.
Many thanks for the introduction and for the extremely stimulating talks, Aline, Doug, and Bill, and for inviting me. I'm extremely excited, guys, to be here and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that are actually practically being implemented right now. I'm going to start with a quick introduction to One Qubit, and I got to tell you, it's a super special shout out to some of the folks, Purang included, who are responsible for training some of the talent that we've deployed at One Qubit. It's amazing what we have in BC at SFU, UVic, and obviously at UBC, in terms of being able to generate incredible talent and people who are on our teams. So very, very grateful that you make the effort and take the opportunity to do that. We've got a few of our people I saw running around in that gather.town thing, and I could see a bunch of our scientists. So if you guys, any of you who are on this conference, actually want to talk to them, please reach out to them. They're really nice people, and I promise you they won't bite. So without much ado, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about One Qubit and some of the really cool things that we've been able to catalyze in BC and in Canada, because I truly believe that Canada has an incredible opportunity develop a significant leadership position in the world of AI, and especially in the deployment of that whole category of diagnostic tools. At One Qubit, we were formed about almost 8 years ago now to sort of look at how do you take these computationally intractable problems in industry and apply a computing, where usually we sort of defaulted to be a quantum computing company and have now morphed beyond quantum into a lot of advanced computational platforms. And so what we do is basically try to solve computationally intractable problems in industry. We have 134 people in the company right now. We did a Series B raise where we raised $45 million. And we have 47 PhDs, and always looking for more people to join us. Lots of real progress that we've made over the last few years, and continue to make some pretty amazing things happen. And again, a special shout out here to the Digital Supercluster, and I'll tell you why, because we've got some really amazing capability that's been given to our company on the health side, with specific reference to one of the tools that I'll share with you shortly. We have 3 offices right now, one in Vancouver, one in Sherbrooke in Quebec, and a third in Waterloo. These are some of the areas that we have a significant focus on. Again, as I said to you guys earlier, advanced computing innovation is the most important area. I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in machine learning in healthcare. These are some of the partners that we have in the hardware ecosystem. We now are significant partners with all of these large companies, especially on quantum and advanced computation. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare. So I joined One Qubit about almost 3 years ago to talk about how do we change the landscape of healthcare delivery in Canada to be more data-driven. So when Doug talks about all of the things that he talks about, I wish I could have just jumped up and down and with excitement, because it's just awesome. I mean, what you're planning, Doug, in BC is so right on so many levels. I just anyway, my heart jumps out with joy when I see about what you're doing, and I really hope it is incredibly successful. What our mission is right now, and it's a pretty audacious mission, and our CEO looks at me and says, "D, come on, seriously?" And I said, "No, I'm serious. You know, our mission, I want to, in my lifetime, touch 1 billion lives. I want to empower clinicians with assistive diagnostic tools that allow them to do that." And yes, it's audacious, but why not, right? I mean, people ask me why. I say, why not? It's an important point. At One Qubit, the work that we're doing in healthcare is sort of split across 4 different areas. We've built and spent the last 2 years building 4 significant platforms. One platform is for image analysis and deep learning in imaging, and basically takes right now our key forte is diagnostic imaging in radiology, because I'm a radiologist by training and I still practice as a radiologist. So the second one, which is very closely interlinked to the image analysis and deep learning platforms that we've built, is a natural language understanding platform. And I'll share with you guys both some real practical applications of these. I'm very happy to announce that both of our products that we've developed in this are actually going live and being released to the world at the end of this week at the Radiological Society of North America meeting, a meeting that has about 30,000 attendees, in partnership with a few vendors in the imaging space. The third area that we've spent a significant amount of time on is trying to understand, how do you create machine learning from continuous data variables? Very important to understand why this is important. If you look at healthcare and the information that comes in healthcare, you do have discrete pieces of data, but you also have continuous data. And one of the projects that we have just announced actually is going to the FDA for approval as a breakthrough device, is a partnership that we have with a company called Alio that builds a small little patch that's about this big and sits over your radial artery. And we built the machine learning algorithms using our continuous variable analytics platform to actually be able to non-invasively demonstrate blood pressure. So you don't need a cuff that wraps around your arm anymore. And it's been tested in the US Armed Forces already, and very, very good results. We have a large gold standard clinical trial that will be happening in Calgary here in Canada over the next few weeks that will validate that this technology actually directly reflects blood pressure by looking at intra-arterial blood pressure. And so a very, very exciting piece of work. But obviously you can understand that in that continuous data variable space, there's lots of opportunity. And the fourth thing that we've done is work significantly in optimization to look at how do we build more efficient healthcare system delivery models, both in terms of scheduling and demand forecasting. We have a very large project that we're doing right now on nurse optimization and nurse scheduling that we hope we'll be able to talk a little bit more about over the next few years. So talk quickly about X-ray. X-ray is our chest X-ray interpretation tool. It was built on about 500,000 radiographs that we trained it on. Here's it implemented in real time. This is actually within a picture archiving and communication systems, fully integrated using standards. I love, Doug, what you said, like there's no point in building a big platform. You might as well just integrate using data standards that exist. And so we use the data standards that exist. The original chest radiograph is on the left-hand side. The radiograph that we've processed using our algorithm is on the right-hand side. We've had a pretty exhaustive clinical trial in Saskatchewan that demonstrates that doctors that use our tool significantly improve the accuracy of anomaly detection in both the lungs and in the pleural spaces. So you can see in this example, and one of the things that we're particularly proud about is this new way of displaying the outputs of these algorithms. So one of the major criticisms that you'll see in health systems is that, particularly with AI, is a lack of transparency, right? Getting the doctor to understand, instead of producing a binary output, we decided to actually allow the doctor to dial up and down the confidence levels of the algorithm. So this provides unparalleled transparency into how the algorithm functions and why, with a number, it believes that certain things are abnormal. Nobody in the world has done this. We've done it. We're going, like I said, live this week at the RSNA. And I truly believe, as a practicing physician, that this will become the default way of displaying outputs for an AI, because it does put the power of the output and the analysis in the hands of the physician. The last one I want to talk to you about is our natural language understanding platform. This is one of the implementations of it. It's a tool called Merlin, and what it allows us to do is significantly improve the quality of care delivery by analyzing radiology reports in real time and automatically creating a scheduled follow-up for that patient. It analyzes the report and looks for all of the different elements in the report that reflect follow-up. So here it is fully integrated into clinical workflows, and again, deploying at the end of this week. And so here's it opening up in a radiology information system provider's software solution called EXA. This is a Konica Minolta system. And you can see this is a radiology report that was generated by a radiologist that says recommended 6-month follow-up. The radiologist signs the report, and immediately it goes into a queue and is queued for a scheduler to actually follow up, and it actually determines the appointment type as well. So you can see here it's determined that we should be doing a CT scan of the chest, and the frequency with which the CT scan of the chest should be ordered. It automatically populates the date. So this is the whole next generation of decision support, as I would call it, for operations in healthcare, where we can actually substantially improve quality. I won't spend too much time talking about applications of NLU in healthcare, but there are myriad, and Doug alluded to some of these already. I actually don't think that we need structured medical data anymore. Having looked at the performance of some of these transformer encoder architecture solutions that we've built and others are building right now, the need for structured medical data is becoming less and less important. So just for all of the students in the room, and for all of you who are interested, we have an incredible team of people here at OneQubit. It's super, super exciting to work with them. I am definitely the dumbest guy in the room. I'm telling you, there's no question about it. I work with brilliant people, and I'm feeling really blessed and truly privileged to be able to work with them. We're always looking for real amazing talent. Right now, our working environments are really wonderful. We have transitioned to a fully 100% virtual work environment. So as you can see, I'm working from my home office right now, and you can work from anywhere you want in the world, really. We have a few employee profiles that will be available to you. Most of our staff actually come from an academic internship or academia directly into industry with us, and we're often the first industry job that they ever have. I do believe that they feel very happy and supported in this role because it is difficult to jump into industry, but we're really happy and a super supportive company when it comes to that. Anyway, enough said from my part. I really hope you enjoy the rest of the session. I consider it a distinct privilege and an honor to be surrounded by people on this panel, and by being asked to speak with you. I really hope that we will have an opportunity to interact together, and please reach out to me if you have any questions or any comments, or if you have anything that you'd like to chat about. And again, with all due respect, much of this work is done by some amazing people on my team, and I feel privileged to be a part of it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Deepak, for your leadership within OneQubit and within BC. Really appreciate it. I believe we have a solution. I guess Bill has managed to call in through phone, and Danielle will be able to share the slides. Bill, do you hear me? Danielle, is Bill muted or?
Yeah, he is. I'm just going to ask. There we go.
Here.
Hi there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Please start.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to come back onto this. My internet service provider decided to take a bit of a holiday and reboot the entire system for the past hour, so thanks for bearing with me. I think we were probably on slide 6 or 7, and Danielle, if you could put that up. I think, you know, much of what it sounds like we've already talked about is the strength of the ecosystem and the universities, the research institutes, the companies, the startups, and many of the other elements that have made this area particularly strong. If we move to the next slide, on slide 8, I think one of the fundamental things, and a real nod to Deepak and the team at OneQubit for showing how this can operate, but I think many of our supercluster projects have embraced this model of collaboration where we can set a table that involves customers and partners like the Ministry of Health and others. We have lead technology partners that help to build out the solutions along with co-development partners, often startups that have particular expertise, and technical service providers that ensure that the product solution is integrated into the customer environment, post-secondary research partners to build those linkages for next generation capabilities into the product set, and for us to co-invest in these sorts of projects so that we can de-risk the proposition for all the parties around the table. And that has kind of served us well. On slide 9, what I can share with you is really how we focus the program. And of course, health is one of the central themes of which we have focused on, but as well we have focuses on the transportation and industrial areas and the natural resources sectors. It's really leveraging our capabilities around how we deal with data, data collection, analysis, visualization, to create a set of programs with an investment focus. And the investment focus comes in the form of these R&D projects that we co-fund, and they are in the streams of precision health, digital twins, data commons, and more recently, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a fairly large sort of pool of money to focus on that, and then capacity building, really all the things that will help to sustain the ecosystem over time. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this next slide just kind of reinforces some of the areas of focus. As I mentioned, there are 5 program areas that we're centered around, but I want to spend some time talking about the health program. And I know we already have some examples from the presenters already, but let's move to the investment slide on the next slide. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to provide co-investment into R&D projects. It's through a competitive selection process. but it does provide a sandbox for trying new and innovative things that wouldn't have been done otherwise. Now, what this has done is sort of led to digital innovations in health, bringing together sort of project consortiums and maybe taking down some of the pre-existing barriers that might have affected the ability for these groups to work together. Because we provide matching co-investment, that helps to kind of de-risk some of the dollars that people have to put into the equation. And ultimately, we're seeking to do multi-year commitments because the nature of the projects themselves often take some time to unfold, to deploy, to prove its merit. And so we have projects that span anywhere from 12 to 36 months in duration. On the next slide, you'll see that although our origins were in BC, we now have a pan-Canadian presence. We have over 800 Canadian organizations that span the gamut of startups and small and mid-sized companies, research institutions, colleges, universities, not-for-profits, government agencies. And we're quite pleased with the reception that we've received on this. And it's actually shown on the next slide, which talks to some of the growth in membership. We've seen an escalating number of members and associates that have joined the Supercluster over the last several years, starting from about 200 just a couple of years ago to now I think it's actually close to 1,000. And on slide 14, the next slide, this is sort of the shape and scope of the number of investments that we've made over that time. We now have a portfolio that's over $200 million worth of project investment commitments. That accounts for over 60 projects. And one of the things that we're really pleased to see is the number of collaborating organizations. So it's close to 300 collaborating organizations that are in these 60+ projects, and we see that continuing to grow. And on slide 15, the next slide, this is how it kind of pans out. On our website, you can read about the projects that are there, but in the 5 areas, as I mentioned, we see a growing number of projects in each of those areas. And if I were to try to zoom in a little bit on what the major themes are, on the next slide, you'll see quite a number of them are really in the digital health space. And I'm going to highlight a few of those in particular that pertain to AI. So if we skip to the AI and healthcare slide 18, actually, I think, why don't we go to that? And so just to give some, I've got 5 projects that I just want to briefly touch on. These were projects that were in around sort of the time of COVID, and I think is really an indicator of how we can use AI to support many of the physicians' clinical practices. And as I think I caught Deepak's comment about how we can extend the reach of some of these tools to affect more patient outcomes. So this particular project is to really use AI in a manner that can help to assess sort of COVID patient care, and it provides sort of a physician assist prediction tool. It's led by a company called 16-Bit, and as you can see, it's got quite a number of collaborators, including Sunnybrook and London Health Sciences Centre, and Roche is in there, and the Vector Institute in terms of some of the work that's being done on the AI side. So that project is quite exciting for us. If we move to the next slide, one of our early projects was centered around the work that MetaOptima has been doing for a number of years here in Vancouver. And I think it's in combination with Care Team and Change Healthcare, BC Cancer Agency, Providence Healthcare, and University of British Columbia and UVic. It's really to extend the capabilities of the dermatological assessment piece that they've got on their mobile phones and running it through AI engines to provide a better determination of the likelihood that a particular mole or skin lesion is malignant or not. And I think this can make a real difference in terms of the time to triage and the time to affect the care protocols necessary to those that would actually have instances of skin cancer. So there's an example of how you can use image data in the context of AI to really support physicians. If we move to the next slide, this is one project around point-of-care ultrasound that we saw early in our Supercluster portfolio that really helps to support remote patient care, particularly in rural communities, using sort of AI capabilities to, and the application set was really around pregnant women, but the extension of the point-of-care ultrasound application was kind of in the COVID case to look at how perhaps lung abnormalities or other sort of protocols could be applied around detection, early detection, particularly in these remote communities. So that's a project that's led by Providence and Change Healthcare, and includes the Vancouver company called Clarius and the University of British Columbia. And we're quite excited about that project as well. And finally, I think the next slide is really about using AI to better manage ICU capacity. As we've kind of noticed with the onset of the pandemic, there's an increasing volume of cases that are COVID related, and it's really has kind of affected the entire sort of system level ability to adapt to the strains of increasing sort of capacity inside ICUs. So this is really an algorithmic approach to looking at how healthcare delivery and balancing loads could be done, and it's led by Altus Labs. And finally, the next slide is really a highlight and a nod to Deepak's project and the work that's being done by OneQubit. I think he talked a lot about what they're trying to do in terms of really extending the capabilities of AI in the context of imaging and X-rays in particular. And again, we're quite excited about that project. So there's a few examples of how we're seeing the intersection of AI and healthcare. And maybe with that, I'll hand it back to our host. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bill. I mean, I, as well as many other researchers across BC, are very thankful of the investment that Supercluster has given to BC. I consider as a gift. And thank you so much for everybody who has put so much effort to translate technology from academia to industry. So with that, we are very close to kind of the end of the scheduled time. I may have to borrow about 5 minutes of the poster session. And I see lots of questions posted. We won't be able to ask all of them. I just try to ask maybe one from each panelist, and I ask everybody to go to gather afterwards and approach each of our panelists and ask their questions. So maybe the first question I can pose is to Aline. One thing that has come up is, does your technology in federated learning, does it also include imaging data?
So yeah, I'll try to answer globally all of the questions that I saw addressed to me. So yes, so this is completely data agnostic. So it could work with an Excel spreadsheet, essentially, up until the most sophisticated databases. So it is really very much data agnostic, and we've designed it in such a way so that it's very adaptable. Regarding questions of regulatory, I think the idea behind using privacy by design and by default is to provide people an incentive to self-regulate. So if you already plan to use a system that implements this, you should have a lessening of regulatory element because you're basically already designed it to enhance privacy. So we're working towards looking what that means in terms of regulatory systems. And we're starting with the US and Canada, and then we'll be moving on to Europe afterwards. And do I have time to address the question on interpretability?
Sure, quickly.
Sure. So, yes, so the question of interpretation and explanation of machine learning models is a big and very important question. And it's an essential question to answer before this could be used for the clinical decision making. However, I mean, it's still a very open research topic. And for models like regression analysis, for example, or linear models, we can easily interpret these. More sophisticated models in the federated setting or not are more difficult, like deep learning, more difficult to interpret and are treated like a black box. Now, there's a lot of work in this space around trying to make them more explainable and interpretable. Adding the federation does not necessarily make this more of a problem. I think it's the privacy and the noising of the data. That's when you start losing a little bit of the interpretation, or it becomes a little bit more murky, because actually that's by design, right? You're making the data a little bit more murky. So now it's going to be a little bit more tricky. And I think this is why it's very important that as these models are introduced at the point of care, that they're introduced very carefully and in an augmentative way, as opposed to a completely prescriptive way. And I hope that answers some of the questions. I'm happy to talk more about it privately.
Thank you so much, Aline. There are a couple of questions for Doug. So I guess the one question is that I guess will the platform, I guess, that the ministry is going to design allow patients download all of their data in a digital format?
Yeah, the goal is to ultimately give patients complete access to all of their records digitally. There's a few edge exceptions to that. For example, some mental health contexts where that's not in the patient's safety interests, but in general, yes. And the problem for the EMRs to be able to get access to data for care provision, you can frame it as the same problem for patient tools to be able to get access. So the ecosystem approach has the goal of allowing patients to have access to all that information as well.
Okay. And the second question is, I guess that the kind of the COVID-19 kind of has brought the kind of discussion between the medicine and population health kind of at the very forefront. So how would, I guess, the platforms, I guess, that ministry are designing kind of incorporate both kind of the medical data and also preventative kind of interventions kind of within the entire spectrum of the patient care?
Yeah, prevention's considered to be a really important element of how the health system needs to behave going forward. So we'll see increasing emphasis on prevention moving forward. So in the short term, we have to get better at managing chronic disease and acute episodes that currently exist. But as we get better systems in place and we can drive that more as the fence at the top of the cliff instead of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, that'll become increasingly important for system sustainability as well as optimizing outcomes.
Great, thank you so much. And Deepak, I guess one question is that how does the platform, the radiology system that you're presenting at RSNA, going to integrate with third-party solutions?
Yeah, so thanks, Prang. The system, we actually have a full stack system that would allow us for that to happen. We use standards like DICOM and HL7 right now for interactions. The servers, we have an opportunity to deploy on cloud and or on premise and or a hybrid version of those. Right now, most of our deployments will be on premise because there's very few picture archiving communication systems that are cloud native. We already have one cloud native solution that we're working with that actually is only on the research level right now, but will definitely translate at some point here to more clinical demand. So the answer is that basically it's all standards compliant, and we don't need any third parties. Really, what we do is we take the information from the PACS system. The PACS system automatically pushes the images and auto routes them to our servers. Our servers run the inference and then put back that image that you saw, which is basically the outputs of the algorithm in that confidence dial type display into the PACS with the same DICOM wrappers around it that then reassociate with the accession number of the patient. So it's all done in an integrated manner on site right now. And actually one of the really cool parts that I'm very happy to say is that we've also been able to do that with the reports. So it actually changes the way in which we approach continuous quality improvement of our algorithms, because we've done a very interesting approach of actually being able to do natural language understanding dynamically on the radiology reports and correlate them with the outputs of our algorithm. So this is a whole next generation of how quality assurance and post-market surveillance, which the regulators require, is actually going to happen. And I hope we'll be able to set the standard for that. We're working with Health Canada. Obviously, they're very excited about what we're doing and where we're going with this, and helping them to set a new bar for how this should work.
Great, thank you so much. I have a question for Bill. Bill, I understand that the Canada Digital Supercluster Technology funding kind of coming up for renewal. One I guess question maybe that I have as a researcher, I guess, within the AI community and also within an institution is how can we help, I guess, to kind of further, I guess, emphasize the impact, I guess, that Supercluster has had on BC and Canada as a whole, so that we can increase the success rate of the renewal application?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for your offer of support. We currently have a call for projects right now, which I think we can invest up to $30 million in projects, and we expect that we'll be running through the decision process and probably have expended all those commitments by the time we reach March of next year. And so, to your point, we're actively seeking to play a role in Canada's economic recovery. We think that investments in digital health, investments in digital transformation broadly for industry is going to be really important as we look beyond sort of this pandemic and how we position Canada for success. So I think to the extent that folks are having conversations with officials from government, officials that may be in cabinet, certainly if you can help us to carry the message about the important work that's being done in this new collaboration model, the success that's been had through these interactions and partnerships, I think that will bode well for supporting not only the efforts that we have, but I think the efforts of what we're trying to do. I think this entire community around moving the health system forward and bringing together the actors to ensure that the innovations can really support what we need to build a sustainable healthcare system in Canada.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, personally working with Digital Supercluster, I consider as one of the most efficient, decision-making bodies we have in BC. So really appreciate the effort that you have put in making everything very streamlined. And
a pleasure. Thank you.
Very final question is that the ethical principles, I guess, how maybe are they considered within the design, I guess, of the overall health system? Maybe this question I can pose it to Doug. You're on mute. Yep.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
So the question is that given the sensitivity of the data when using AI in the health sector, are there ethical principles that are being considered and or applied?
Yeah, the whole data governance and information governance more general question is getting a lot of consideration. So there's obviously the ethics around it, but there's also the broader trust framework and how do you create a situation where citizens are empowered around what happens to their data, and at the same time, providers are conforming within a regulatory framework that ensures trust and safety around the data. It's a lot of attention getting into that at the moment.
Okay, and I guess as a follow-up question, how would the kind of your design as within the ministry incorporates also the patient families, I guess, within the care of the patient?
Yeah, so so there's complexities around there's privacy complexities around how you expose information to family members. The current focus is primarily on including individuals in access to their care, but those are questions around proxy access and the involvement of the circle of care around the patient with their, not just their family, but their friends and social supports is equally important. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. So with this, I'd like to call our panel to an end, and really appreciate everybody and for your contributions and great discussion. I want to point everybody to the main session that's happening within Gather. If you have any follow-up questions with our panelists, please you can use the locate feature within Gather to find them and go to them and talk to them. Danielle, is there any other final remark?
Sorry. No, that's it. Thank you again to all our speakers. That was awesome. And hopefully everyone will join us over in the Gather space.